session, live coding with Alan Havati. He's going to talk about functional data flow. Alan, everything is yours. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much, Mads. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is the second session in our live coding data science sort of series. And we started off by looking at this at a specific data challenge called the Explainable Machine Learning Challenge. And I will go into part two because we did not finish with that. I'll definitely take about half of the session or so to do this. But before we get into that, I thought I would do something because we've had some requests that we didn't do enough live coding. And I think that that's right. And so I'd like to do something with a simpler data set. In fact, it's a toy data set to illustrate a new function that I've added to my toolkit. If you remember last time, for those who were here last time, I actually have a toolkit that is going to be bundled up with my book, which I think is one of the most important things that is part of my book, because the book is about a specific data sort of study that we did, a long-term study at the Veterans Administration. But the functions that I've added to make this work out were actually much more general, and I wound up using them in many other subsequent projects. And I find it really interesting that you can do these sort of one-liners, and you can keep adding. As you can see, I have maybe 100 sort of very generic functions that I keep adding on, and they're all about manipulating data, whether it's tabular data or hierarchies and so on. And they're very generic sort of functions that I hope that at some point will become part of the language. So this is the latest one that I've added. It's called replace index. So let me just discuss that for about 15 minutes, and I think that people will get the idea of why these kinds of patterns are so important and so powerful within the language that are very difficult to do with some of these other data mining languages out there. So the idea was that I'm working on a new project that involves log analysis. And I've created an example log, and I'm showing it to you here. I've saved it, and I'm importing it. And it basically consists of 5 sessions, numbers 0 through 1. So if we look at one session, it's very simplistic. I'm going to normalize it here. And you see that it's essentially just a sequence of events. In this case, they're generated by a device. So there are 5 sessions with, let's say, a mobile device, like a phone. And the different items here consist of screens, web services that are called from the device, and events that are generated by the code itself, by the device itself. So these are all logged, and they're saved. And you want to do some log analysis with these. And the idea was that we saw that some of the sessions were longer than others, and essentially wanted to have some function that is similar to map indexed, but it allows you to enumerate things in a way that would normalize by the length of the log. So if you look at this particular, let me make this a little bigger. This particular log has something like 20 different entries in it, but if you look at log number 2, there's fewer entries. I'll again normalize here. And if you do something like map index, I have a function called enumerate, which essentially uses map index to do this replace. Okay, so if I take this log and I enumerate it, since it's just a list, you see that essentially I've striped or indexed this data, and each one is a pair of, it's still inside of a data set, so I can keep normalizing this. You can see that it essentially just added the index number or position as a new item and prepended it to that, okay? However, map index doesn't have a way, as far as I know, to take the length into account, right? So for example, if this item in the log has 20 items, I essentially want to do things like enumerate it, but only go from 0 to 1. And put fractional numbers in between them. So I created this function called replace index. And this function essentially combines, first of all, it's a query. It's not really defined as a function. You can see that it's a query here. And it's going to illustrate several things. So first of all, it's a combination of map indexed and also replace is going to use them. But primarily, I want to illustrate that you can use query to great effect into here. So how do I write this? First of all, how does it work? So if I take this example log here, number 2, and do replace index. Let's see here, and you provide a rule. So this is an operator, right? So essentially, we can provide a rule here. The rule here should be in a particular format so that we can pass both the data and the dimensions. And to do that, the query begins by passing the identity and the dimensions here, okay? So the rules should be something like this. Let me see if I can fetch it here. Before I show you that, I'm going to show you just a couple of tricks of how you can sort of override data set's tendency to not show all the items. So if you can see here, this is wrapped inside of a data set, and you can see that the items are there, but they're not displayed, except for the very short ones, right? So you can do several things here. You can say, and I'm sorry that I'm not actually live coding it, but this is pretty simple, right? You take the example log and you apply short to it, and now you can see that most of them actually show up using the shorthand, except for the first one. You can use framed, and you can make even the frame kind of invisible if you want to by making it white or gray or something like that. This all seems to work for most of them, but not the first one again. Or you can wrap it, and I think this is the preferred method. You can just wrap each individual list into a data set in itself, and you can see that this worked for all of the different items. Okay, so these are just several different rules to make that happen. Okay, so if I add this replace, go back to the example here. If I have this example log here, I'm going to define this function which is called enumerate reverse, and I'll show you how that works. But basically, you can see that it uses replace index with a particular rule. Unlike map index, in which you have access to the slot notation, in map index you use things like 1 and then 2, and then you have to fetch the parts. I really don't like that anonymous aspect of it, so I prefer like these rules and pattern replacement. So enumerate reverse essentially works like this. If I do this, it should work directly here. Okay, now you can see that I took this log and it starts off with 19 and goes down to 0. And the rule, because there's a specific rule here that takes into advantage of the length being the first element of the dimension of this list here. But I can do more than that, right? So for example, like I said, like if you add this one, and of course, one of the greatest thing about Mathematica is just you can just take that slice that you just worked on and replace it with all, and all of a sudden you have the same function that is automatically applied to all the branches. And again, I challenge people to do this in Python, because basically you have to write these nested in what are called comprehensions, and they become exponentially more difficult the more layers of data you have. In this case, the data is simple, but by using this is just a fantastic sort of shortcut to make things, to basically just work on just the things that you want to at first, and then scale up your query. All right, so here's another example, and this is really what I was aiming at. I created another enumerate, which is called enumerate unit interval, which again uses replace index, but with a different rule. And this rule essentially is just saying, take the position, which is provided by map index itself, but divided by the normalized length. So essentially, this is going to map these to 0 to 1 to essentially, let's see here if it works. If I just do it on one of them, you can see now that I've striped it, but instead of the index going like 1, 2, 3, 4 or backwards, I'm essentially just taking this pattern and